Okay, hopefully this is recording my screen right now. I'm really sorry I can't do a Loom video. My Chromebook just can't function, just can't handle it. So we're just going to do it through voice only, I'm afraid. But according to Boris, I'll be seeing you all face to face very shortly anyway, so I'm sure you can live without that for the time being. Right, the first thing that you need to do is pause this presentation for 5 minutes and just answer the 4 questions that are on the slide in front of you. All right, now for the rest of the lesson, it would be really useful if you had your context timelines. I put a picture of what that looks like on the slide, so find those, and these should have quotes attached because that was a task that you were set a couple of lessons ago, a couple of weeks ago. Okay, this is going to be invaluable when it comes to what you're being asked to do today. I should also point out that this lesson is to cover the double, so feel free whenever you need a break or whatever to pause it, start it up again, take your time with it, but it will be, a lengthy kind of set of activities, which will be made much easier with the context timeline and the quotes. So do make sure you've got that. All right. We are going to look at Mr. Burling, okay? He is integral to the plot of An Inspector Calls. He's the patriarch of the family, and he is a very domineering kind of presence in that first act. Okay, I've listed some things about his character on the slides, and we're going to approach them all one at a time so we really get to know him. If you need to take any notes, that's absolutely fine. Do however you need, but you will have access to this PowerPoint, of course. So he is the epitome of capitalism. He is made to look ignorant. He loves the sound of his own voice. I've put, how do we know this structurally? That's basically because in the beginning of the act, he says more than anybody else. And when he speaks, it's sort of monologues. He goes on and on and on for ages, and people are forced to sit and listen to him. And they even make jokes about how he makes speeches and how he shouldn't, etc. So that's how we know he's quite domineering. He's quite sort of egotistical. He really knows he likes to be listened to and respected and looked up to and heard. He's deeply, deeply insecure. Okay, so you can see that because when people need to command conversation, they need people to be listening to them. They need to feel as though they have control and that they are the biggest presence in the room. It's normally a result of sort of deep-seated insecurities. So we're going to look at that as well, where those come from, how we know that Mr. Burling is an insecure character. Arthur and his wives, that's Mr. and Mrs. Burling, Sybil, act as binary opposites for the character of the inspector. We'll come back to this in terms of definitions and things as well. So if you need to, again, you can pause, take down some notes if you want, but it's all on the slide. Okay, the epitome of capitalism. All this means is the perfect example. Okay, if you wanted to explain or give an example of capitalism to somebody, you would use Mr. Burling. You would say, look at this man, look at what he believes in, look at how he acts and behaves, how he runs his business. He is the epitome of the capitalist mindset, the capitalist viewpoint. So pause this for 5 minutes and find me 3 quotes that show Mr. Burling's capitalist tendencies. All right, we're back. So here, this is taken just from the very, very opening of the play, probably the second page of it. And we've got Mr. Burling. I've underlined a bit here, just as an example. It says, your father and I have been friendly rivals in business for some time now. Though Crofts Limited are both older and bigger than Burling and Company. You could also use that for his insecurity as well. And now you've brought us together. And perhaps we may look forward to the time when Crofts and Burlings are no longer competing, but are working together for lower costs and higher prices. Okay, even though he's at a family dinner, he is there to celebrate his daughter's engagement. He is using this as an opportunity to negotiate with the Crofts and try and sweeten Gerald up to get lower costs and higher prices and try and sort of have a merger there between the Burling and Company and the Crofts Limited. All right, so always that capitalist mindset, always profits on the brain, always how can I manipulate this situation to sort of put myself in an advantage. How can I benefit personally from this situation? Right, binary opposites. I feel like I'm going at the speed of light, so I'm just going to slow down a little bit. If you are looking for a binary opposite, they are essentially, it's this idea of good and evil, man and nature, or man and woman, like opposite, young versus old, um, rich versus poor. So just opposites, essentially, binary opposites, direct opposites. And in the play, we see a lot of binary opposites. You'll see binary opposites between class, age, but importantly, also in terms of social viewpoints, in terms of political ideologies as well. So we've got the very obviously socialist inspector, who's very much priestly in character form, and we've got the Burlings, the older Burlings I've put, showcasing how a capitalist would respond to certain situations. So I would like you to find 3 examples that show that the older Burlings are holding viewpoints that are completely opposite to the inspector. Okay, so again, pause for 5 minutes. Okay, Mr. Burling is insecure. Now, we looked a little bit earlier at a quote that showed this when he says, I know Crofts Limited is much larger and has been around for longer than Burling and Company, but, so he's already very aware that his company is not as impressive as Gerald's family's, and he kind of vocalizes that. But his insecurity stems, really, from his always wanting to better himself. So what I've included here is a class hierarchy, a social hierarchy. Okay, you can see at the top of the social hierarchy, you've got the upper classes, then you've got the upper middle class, and working or lower class. Upper class is often known, well, sometimes known as the landed gentry. So essentially, you need to own land. You can't sort of find your way into the upper classes. You can't work really hard to become upper class. You are either upper class or you are not. It's something you're sort of born into. And we know that the Crofts are upper class because we've got Lord and Lady Croft. Okay, but interestingly, Sybil Burling, before she was Sybil Burling, was born into an upper class family. Okay, and this is where gender roles come in as well. So when she married, so I put pre-marriage, she's upper class. When she marries Arthur Burling, she becomes upper middle class because she loses her social status as a result of marrying beneath her family. So Arthur Burling is going to be insecure about this. He will never be good enough for his wife's family, and he is trying to sort of bring his family's social status and standing up by marrying Sheila off. Because Sheila is a woman and she's marrying an upper class man, her social status will increase. So whatever Sheila and Gerald's family becomes, that will be an upper class family. Whereas by Sybil, because she's female, marrying a male middle class man, her social status drops. Okay, so Arthur is going to be very, very self-conscious about this, very aware that he's never been good enough for his wife's family. He's not as good as, in terms of, he's not as high standing in society as the Crofts. And at the bottom end, you've got Eva and you've got Edna. Okay, so just to have a little look at how society was functioning at the time, the class system in itself still exists within the UK. People will say that it's not as prevalent now, but I would have to disagree. I think that it does still impact on your ability to move. It's difficult to move between classes. Somewhat intentionally, it's made to be difficult to move between classes, and of course, the upper class remains untouchable. Really hard to get into. All right, so you need to understand the class system to understand why Mr. Burling might feel insecure in his marriage in terms of his social standing. Okay, so you can pause here to jot down that class hierarchy diagram, please. Okay, and also to think about how this hierarchy evidences the fact that Mr. Burling is insecure. Okay? Right. This is the most important because this is what our essay that we're doing at the end of this lesson is going to focus on. Mr. Berling is made to look ignorant. Okay, Priestley did not agree with the capitalist viewpoint that Mr. Berling held, and to show how silly and how ridiculous a viewpoint it was, he made Mr. Berling, the epitome of capitalism, look silly. And he did this through the use of dramatic irony. We should already know what that is, but if you don't, just jot down that quick definition. It is essentially when the audience or the reader, so we at home, know more than the characters that we are reading about do. It might be, as I put an example there, when you go to a pantomime, for example, and you know there's someone behind them, but they can't see them, and that's a very sort of basic example of dramatic irony. So, pause here again. Make sure you've got the definition down if you didn't know what it was already, and look back over the quotes that you attached to those timelines a few weeks ago and find some examples of dramatic irony in terms of Mr. Berling. So when he says, for example, the Titanic is unsinkable, absolutely unsinkable. The audience are sat there in 1945 when the play is first performed, and they know that the Titanic sank. So Mr. Berling is made to look really foolish through that. So that's one example. I'd like you to find me some more. So pause here again. Okay, this is the essay question that we're going to be answering. Okay, the other class groups are using the Macbeth question for their sort of progress check, but we have already done that, had that back in March, so we are going to be doing a slightly different one based on an Inspector Calls. So I've listed here, so the question is, how does J.B. Priestley present the character of Mr. Berling in Act 1 of An Inspector Calls? I've listed some characteristics here. He is ignorant, okay? That's in bold because I want you to use that one. Okay, he is arrogant, insecure, obnoxious, and controlling, and then there's an ellipsis there because you can pick your own example as well. But I would like you to use ignorant, and I would like you to use two other character traits or characteristics for Mr. Berling in your essay. So pause here and select two other traits. They don't have to be on the slide, but you do need to use ignorant. Right, you can see here that I have added some evidence to the traits that kind of you could talk about within the play. So he's ignorant, and he's shown as ignorant through the use of dramatic irony. We know this because we've just talked about it. He's arrogant and obnoxious, okay, and we can see this through a structural technique that Priestley's used by giving him lots of monologues, okay, having him drone on and on about things and forcing his family to listen. Again, we've discussed that, and that kind of covers those points there. He's insecure, so you would use the context of the class system, which we talked about, and he's controlling. He's controlling because of his insecurity, so you could link that in terms of kind of controlling who his daughter marries to try and improve his social status, controlling the conversation over dinner. So there's lots of links. And obviously anything that you've chosen, any other traits that you've chosen, you need to be able to evidence as well. Okay. For the final time, before we do the essay, I would like you to pause in a minute, and I'd like you to find supporting evidence for each of your selected character traits. So find me some quotes that show his ignorance. Find me some quotes that show me he is arrogant and controlling, conceited, whatever else you've chosen, okay? Then you're going to find contextual links to each. So obviously, when you're talking about dramatic irony, your context is that it was shown in 1945, but it was set in 1912, but actually written in 1945. So that's the context that makes Mr. Berling look foolish, okay? Because with hindsight, we know as an audience, and the audience in 1945 knew, that these things had happened. We did end up in a war, women got the right to vote, there were workers' strikes, the Titanic sank, all of these things happened that Mr. Berling proclaimed would never happen. Okay, so use that is the context there, for example. And find events within the play that support your argument. So again, Mr. Berling arranging the marriage for his daughter is an example of him being controlling, using an event within the play. Okay, so pause now and find all of these things. Okay, For the final part, so you might want to have a little breather, make yourself a cup of tea or something. You are going to answer the essay question. Okay, I've given you a couple of sentence starters here that you might want to use for your introduction. Remember that in the introduction, we like to lay out the purpose of the play. So, why did Priestley write An in Spectacles in the first place? And then, why did he choose to represent Mr. Burling in this way? And how has he been presented? Okay, so you could say he's initially presented as arrogant, which makes the audience take an instant dislike to him. Blah, blah, blah. How does that help with Priestley's mission, his purpose, his goal when writing this? Okay, give yourself 45 minutes. You've already planned, so you've got 45 minutes just to write, and then submit that finished essay for me on Show My Homework by the end of today. Okay, it can be as late as you need, but I'd like it in today because I want to mark those on Tuesday. All right. Any questions? Comment on Show My Homework. Good luck.